Just ignore the fact that Steve is actually inhabiting the body of a completely innocent bystander who absolutely didn't give permission for any of this stuff to happen to him and couldn't consent when Diana decides to have sex with him, because I guess stuff like this is morally and ethically fine when a woman does it.
It's Blue. Make sure you like and subscribe and go follow me on my Twitch and my other YouTube channel. Those links are down below. Also my Patreon, where I have more content on there that I don't post here.
This is Sparta!
Today I'm going to be reacting to More Critical Drinker on why modern movies suck. Nobody can stay dead.
Benjamin Franklin once famously quipped that there are only two certainties in life: death and taxes. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. The shocking rise in personal income tax rates over the past 10 years.
Oh, come on!
Sorry, death. Specifically, death in media. Surely the ultimate and most permanent conclusion to any character's story. The end of everything they are, and everything they ever could be. Everything they might have said and thought. Every task they might have accomplished. Every life they might have touched. It all ends when they draw their final breath. And just like in real life, their passing often leaves behind an aching void of emptiness and grief that other characters, and even the audience themselves, must struggle to come to terms with. At least it used to. Nowadays, the death of a major character is treated more like a passing inconvenience that can be easily fixed whenever the plot needs it to happen, or a hack writer wants to jangle some shiny keys in front of the audience for a bit of cheap nostalgia, or the studio decides they want to squeeze a bit more money out of a once popular legacy character. Whatever the reason, it all adds up to the same problem. Nobody stays fucking dead anymore, and that creates some very obvious additional problems that we'll get into later. Believe that. But for now at least, let's consider some of the most popular and convenient paths for character resurrection. I mean, we'll leave out the absolute chads who just bring people back to life with no explanation whatsoever.
Somehow Palpatine returned. Somehow Palpatine returned. Somehow Palpatine returned. Palpatine returned.
Oh.
Probably the least damaging method is to work more or less within the confines of the fictional world that you've created, usually when you've got highly advanced science and technology to fall back on. It'll definitely stretch the audience's suspension of disbelief, but with luck it can be done without completely breaking your own narrative rules. Like the Matrix Resurrections, for example. Remember Neo and Trinity? Remember how they both totally died at the end of Matrix Revolutions when Trinity took a steel girder to the gut and Neo got assimilated by Agent Smith, and then his brain exploded or something and he turned into sci-fi space Jesus? I mean, it wasn't high art or anything, but it got the job done, I suppose. But what happens when you're a studio desperate to squeeze a little more money out of an old franchise, but you desperately need your two main actors to be involved again? Fuck it, let's just say that the machines fixed their bodies up, brought them back to life, and plugged them right back into the Matrix like nothing happens. Genius. Or how about Colonel Quaritch from Avatar? Remember him? Probably not, because apparently half the world's entire population went to see that movie, but most of them could barely tell you a single thing about it today apart from the blue people were cool and the planet looked nice and that made my brain do a happy. But the point here is that Quaritch ultimately got turned into a human pincushion and ended up very dead as a result. But what do you do when it's 15 years later and you need an antagonist for your sequel and you can't be arsed coming up with a new one? Fuck it, let's just say he downloaded his brain into an avatar body off screen, despite the fact that his entire character was driven by his complete and utter contempt for the Na'vi, and he absolutely would never have agreed to such a procedure, and bingo, he's back in the game like nothing happens.
Very good point that's being made. I have referenced and probably given off a vibe that, oh, I liked Avatar too, but I think it's just because maybe I didn't express as much discontent for the movie as maybe some people have or have shared online. But I will state, before anything else and any of the other details are given, I'll just state it now, I can totally see why that movie was extremely disappointing. The main thing that he also pointed out is the guy, I don't remember his name, but like he said, we don't really remember what happened in the second movie, but he was in the first, he was the main villain, and they bring him back. You're working so hard and so long on a movie for so, like, 10 plus years, you can't just make a different villain or protagonist and make a different story, even like different characters. Nothing wrong with showing that they had kids in the future, but I could also see how people would complain that the personalities were very dry in the characters. So The complaint of a lot of these movies and how it's becoming more popular to just rip characters back from death is very valid. You don't really see a lot of really great movies or shows do that. Some of the best movies and shows stay away from that.
I mean, shit, man, sometimes we don't even need to wait for a sequel. We can just bring characters back to life in the very next scene. Like in Star Trek Into Darkness, when Captain Kirk sacrifices his life to fix the Enterprise warp core by kicking it until it starts working again.
He can't be serious.
Honestly, if you want a single moment that pretty much exemplifies the attitude of modern Star Trek, then here it is. Anyway, because J.J. Abrams only knows how to repurpose stuff that other people have already done far better, the whole scene is basically trying to mirror the death of Spock in The Wrath of Khan. But whereas that scene was poignantly handled and the audience was given an entire movie to process the grief of his death, and Kirk ultimately had to sacrifice his career, his ship, and even his own son to get Spock back, Into Darkness brings Kirk back to life literally minutes later by injecting him with Dirk Benedict Bundersnatch's magical Superman blood, which can apparently cure just about any disease or ailment, up to and including death itself. Damn, man, I sure hope they get a sample of that so that they can basically prevent any disease ever, instead of just forgetting about it the moment it's accomplished the one thing that the plot needs it for.
Fuck.
Another variation of the techno-jargon bullshit approach is to use the magical bullshit approach instead. Like in Wonder Woman 1984, where Diana uses the magical dildo crystal thing that grants wishes to bring Steve Trevor back from the dead. And for the purposes of this video, we'll just ignore the fact that Steve is actually inhabiting the body of a completely innocent bystander who absolutely didn't give permission for any of this stuff to happen to him and couldn't consent when Diana decides to have sex with him, because I guess stuff like this is morally and ethically fine when a woman does it. Anyway, the goal of the writers was once again to bring back a popular character that had already been killed off because they're so fucking lacking in anything even resembling imagination that all they could think to do was replicate the relationship dynamic of the previous film, thus making his sacrifice in that movie completely and utterly pointless.
Son of a bitch!
Oh my god!
Another approach, which is possibly the most destructive in terms of its far-reaching plot repercussions, is using time travel and or alternate timelines to bring dead characters back to life. I mean, how many times have the Terminator movies used branching timelines to wheel out an increasingly saggy and decrepit Arnold Schwarzenegger to do his T-800 thing again? A role that he hasn't been able to convincingly play since the 1990s. And each time they do it, they have to ask the audience to conveniently forget whatever happened in the previous films because they've just been overwritten. Terminator Genisys effectively cancelled out the events of, well, basically the entire franchise up until that point, whereas Dark Fate asked us to pretend that everything after Terminator 2 never actually happened, while trying to replace it with a storyline that was infinitely worse in every possible way. It's a bit like going on a first date that's not really working out, and instead of just leaving, you burn down the entire restaurant and everyone inside it. Or Avengers Endgame, which suddenly threw in a time travel machine that allowed the writers to bring not one, but two major characters back to life, not only making their deaths in the previous movie completely meaningless, but opening the door to much bigger problems, like, why don't you use a time machine to recruit entire armies of superheroes from different timelines to counter any possible threat you could ever come up against? Why not do this every time someone dies or something goes mildly wrong?
I think that these videos are very helpful because I think whenever you're watching the movie or you're in the moment, as you see things, it's a little bit easier to understand and put it together, but it's almost like you leave the movie theater and if there was something wrong with the movie, it doesn't really stick with you anymore, so you just kind of forgot about all of the stuff that was, oh yeah, that did totally happen. They did that. They did that. And then rubbed it in your face when they made shows about how they did that.
Why not do this every time someone dies or something goes mildly wrong? Why not go forward in time to procure advanced weapons and technology that can totally help you in the present? Why haven't other people and factions invented time travel as well? Why isn't there a fucking massive universal arms race for such world-shattering technology? Questions like these will simply never end because time travel is the ultimate narrative can of worms. Once you've opened it, there's no logical way to close it again, and it's only going to grow until it consumes your entire fictional universe, invalidating every plot point and destroying even the illusion of stakes and consequences. The final method is a word that I've come to utterly despise over the past couple of years, a word that's largely responsible for speeding up the downfall of modern superhero movies, a word called multiverses.
The multiverse also is very interesting because I think that it was in the past a way that writers could also take and use characters and be creative with it and branch off from it without destroying or changing storylines that have already happened, to give new illustrators even a chance to maybe make like the designs of the costumes different or take place in a different area. And so the characters don't, there's like that explanation of how does all of this happen in one lifetime. Oh, it's in different like multiverses, whereas in the movies it feels a lot more stingy and weird or selfish because it's only created to solve plot holes.
Want to bring back a dead character played by the same actor, or one from a totally different version of your IP? No problem, just multiverse them into existence, and you barely even have to come up with a justification because who even cares, really? The fans certainly don't. They just want to see different versions of their favourite characters interacting with each other, making jokes and fighting bad guys. It's the movie equivalent of watching a little kid smash together their G.I. Joe and He-Man toys. It doesn't really make any sense, but it's entertaining at least from a novelty point of view. I mean, Spider-Man No Way Home at least did a decent job with the concept, mostly because the characters were handled with a hint of respect, there was a compelling emotional core driving things forward, and the movie knew to keep the narrative relatively contained and grounded. The problem is that just like with time travel, it opened the floodgates to a gigantic tidal wave of shit to flow out into cinemas. Suddenly everyone was jumping on the multiverse bandwagon because it was a fun gimmick, and when you're out of actual serious creative ideas, gimmicks are basically all you've got left. That's why we had Michael Keaton's Batman taking on CGI space aliens in a desert in the middle of the day, or Doctor Strange fighting an evil version of himself with a third eye for some reason, or Kang and this fucking floating potato threatening to conquer all of existence. It's what happens when one good idea gets hijacked by a bunch of useless hacks desperate to exploit the next big thing before everyone else gives up and moves on. And that, dear viewer, is the fate that awaits so many movies who try this kind of shit, because the obvious result of routinely bringing dead characters back to life with the most flimsy justifications is that nothing that happens carries any weight anymore, because it can all be undone whenever the writers feel like it. Whether it's through some contrived scientific or magical bullshit, alternate timelines overwriting past events, or different realities merging together, it all adds up to the same basic problem. Nothing matters anymore, so there's no reason to get invested in any of it. If your favourite character dies, so what? There's no reason to feel bad because they'll probably be back in the sequel. If the villain gets defeated, what difference does it make? Because they'll return for payback sooner or later. It becomes nothing more than a crutch for writers who can't stand on their own 2 feet and come up with new original ideas to move a narrative forwards. Because why take a chance on that when you can just bring back recognisable things that were once popular and leech off the success of other people's hard work? The end result is a kind of creative inertia, like a car spinning its wheels in the mud, splattering shit everywhere without actually making any forward progress. Combine this with the over-reliance on sequels, reboots and remakes, and we're fast becoming a culture mired in stagnation, recycling inferior copies of old ideas and properties with declining skill and passion. The stories we tell ourselves now have become simple commodities, as disposable and forgettable as a fast food lunch, rather than actual artistic endeavours with something meaningful to say. Hollywood might be able to resurrect any character that they've bought the legal rights to, but the one thing they can't bring back to life is the interest of their own audience. And I think this year they're gonna learn that lesson in the hardest way possible. Anyway, that's all I've got for today.
Ooh.
Go away now.
What a good video. I think that we've done a few of these so far, so I hope that it doesn't almost seem overkill, but I do think that the conversation is very interesting, and how he goes into detail about specific reasons as to why there's frustration with modern movies or modern shows, etc. This one would be its own topic because characters don't stay dead, so there's no consequences, which kind of trickles down into a lot of really negative effects. If things are going to be remade, which we've already talked about in another video, you're also now already expecting that any character that you've previously seen die, that you were very attached to that death, will just kind of mindlessly, with no explanation and no compelling reason, come back. I know a lot of people didn't like The Amazing Spider-Man. It was the second Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield in between Tobey Maguire and Tom Holland. Why does that feel like that's not his name? I don't know what's wrong with me. But one of the things that I really liked in the movie, and I can't think that a spoiler alert is needed, but if it is, run. I thought it was actually at least very decent and very shocking, based off of how a lot of the movies have gone, that Gwen Stacy dies at the end, especially being in his own hands. It was not because of a villain or like, no, he because he couldn't save her, and she dropped and didn't come. That's how they ended it. We're done. They were walking away. It was shocking, and I thought that was one of the most, like, I thought about that for years. I thought about that forever. So personally, I thought the 3 Spider-Mans all coming together was one of the best that I've heard or referenced seen when movies did actually do that. But I completely know that I'm biased because all the other times that it's been done, a lot of them I'm not very involved in, like Star Trek and Star Wars, and I'm just not as involved in those. So plus, definitely still have a lot of complaints about the Spider-Man coming, like that entire movie. There's so many complaints. Make sure you also follow Critical Drinker and go check out his actual original video on his channel, because that is where I'm getting the content from that we're responding to. And if you guys haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe, and go follow all my links down below. And I will see you all next time.